Thank you, dear heart, and welcome everybody. Delighted that you're with us. Once again, to move forward in this standing. And understanding is almost an inappropriate word. It's something that most of the world pushes us toward, and yet thinking that the mind can understand something is like thinking your computer understands anything. Your computer can spit out all kinds of data, whatever data you put in it, but does the computer understand when you say 2 plus 2 and it spits up 4, that it means 4? Does the computer have any comprehension of that? And, you know, we've been taught that the mind is the end all and the be all, but truth can't be known by the mind. It can only be experienced by the being. You know, when you have, you know, people call it a spiritual experience. Things open and great insight comes. And the next day you turn to a friend to explain that insight and you're speechless because there's nothing to say. There's nothing the mind can comprehend about what just happened. It's just a storage device for the past. Now, the chapter in the book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again, speaks about the has-been. And that's what the mind is. It's a has-been. So the mind is always striving to know, to know, to know, to know. The title of my book, Why Is This Happening? The mind wants to know why. The object of the book is not to get people to understand why. The object of the book is to understand the device through which they're trying to understand why, make corrections in the device so the device supports the being experiencing what's true. Turn to your friend and you told them about, you started telling them about that spiritual experience, and the words just weren't there, and your mind made a feeble attempt to explain the experience. And yet the reason the attempt is so feeble is because the experience is so enormous that the mind can't even start to contain it. So our objective here is going to be to build brain cells so that the mind supports us in following the one thing the mind can be given, and that is the directions for correction. So the practice of the tools leads one to an experience called healing. And one of the primary practices that we're heading for is to recognize who we are as human beings. And as we've said several times, the key words that lead one to this experience in Aramaic turned backward by the mind, the Greek mind trying to understand it and trying to explain it. So virtually every key word is turned backward. So the objective here is to develop the brain cells, to bring correction to the mind, and then practice the tools that lead directly to this experience of being. So to have this experience, and you know, if we were to use an analogy, you know, when we talk about healing, and I've shared this several times over the years on the show, and it bears repeating here again as we move deeper and deeper into the Aramaic understanding. Hopefully we do, into pardon me, I should say more correctly, language is interesting, I should say more correctly, moving to the experience of being and utilizing the tools that disable the mind's ability to block that experience. Great line in the Course in Miracles. You need not seek for love. You do only seek, find, and release. Actually, the quote is, you need only seek the barriers, but to seek and forgive the barriers to the experience of yourself as the presence of love. And again, that experience is so enormous, it doesn't fit in the mind. And the healing process is one where there are disintegrative energies in the mind. In Aramaic, the word that described those disintegrative energies was sin, an archery term that simply means off the mark. And, I go back 35 or so years ago where a major piece of understanding of the process was handed to me. We were doing an intensive, had a fairly large group, somewhere around 50 or so people, and there was a person that was in a major, obvious traumatized and had lived in that traumatized state for decades. And during the intensive, there was this shift that happened for that person that was just like everybody could see it. It was just like, whoa, what just happened? And of course, I'm working to understand, try to get my mind to understand what just happened. How did that happen? What occurred? Why did this person out of the 50 or so in the room get this magnificent healing? Why did the woman with the issue of blood who says, I know I only need to touch the hem of Yeshua's garment, not about touching a piece of cloth, but getting into a field, an energy field of love that could vitalize the love in her, that could strengthen her experience. Why did only she of the whole crowd that was gathered around heal? And what I was told in that experience, as I'm asking, I'm seeking, I'm working to grasp this, and what I was told was that for healing to occur, that is the dissolution or the forgiveness of aberrant energies, sin, energies that are off the mark from the human structure, whether those things are stored in what we call the mind or the brain, whether they're stored in tissue, whether they're stored in the genes. What needs to happen, two things need to occur. That aberrant hidden energy, that which is relegated to the unconscious, that which is hidden, and we all have mountains and mountains. Carl Jung calls it the shadow work, moving into the dark side of the mind and bringing that side of the mind fully present to the light. And so what I was shown in that moment was that two things had to occur. Love had to be conscious, active, and present. And that which was hidden in the unconscious, hidden in the mind or in the body, had to come forward directly rather than being projected into one's brain's image of another. So remember this cycle of denial, dissociation, projection. What is denial? When I think or speak as though something moving inside of me is caused by something outside of me. Certainly the things inside of me can be triggered by someone outside of me, but they are not caused by anyone outside of me. But when I think or speak as though they are, then I'm in denial. And when I'm in denial, I've dissociated from that piece of content in my own mind. Whatever the real cause is of what it is that I'm experiencing that I don't want to experience, by denial, by in essence saying to my mind, show me that Bill's the reason I'm feeling this, rather than because of something in me, I have to dissociate from that content in my own mind. I have to deeply hide it from myself. I cut myself off from it. I no longer have access to it. And when I do that, the act of dissociating from it, the act of pressing it down, intensifies it, presses it energetically out into the world. You've heard me use the example before of, let's imagine I've got a 3-foot diameter spring that's 3 feet tall and it's sitting there on the floor. Can it do anything? No. But what if I go over and I push down on it and I lock it down? And I push down on it and I spend years and years and years, perhaps generations, pushing that spring down and locking it, and finally I undo the lock. What happens? All of that potential energy in the spring flies into action. So when I'm in denial and dissociation, if I come from a long line of deniers, that is people who are members of the one world religion of blame, when something painful happens inside of them, the conversation's always about somebody else. Look what you did to me. That's the act of denial. Causes dissociation. And that energy, the more I dissociate from it, the more I press down on it, the more I energetically push it out into the world. I've shared before a conference that I went to. I used to keynote at a conference called Global Science out in Colorado and in Florida. And this goes back 30 or so years ago. And a gentleman named Marcel Vogel was keynoting at the conference as well. And Marcel brought a thing to the conference called a Delaware camera, and it was a camera with which he could take a picture of the high energy waves that leave the mind when we think a thought. This was some of Marcel's latest research toward the latter end of his life. In his early life, at the age of 11, the kind of mind Marcel had was that he is the man who invented chemical light. You know, if you go to a football game and you buy a light stick and there are two tubes inside of a plastic container, plastic tube, and you break the two tubes and the chemicals mix and they light up. Marcel invented that at the age of 11, patented it himself. Marcel worked for IBM. The reason you and I have a computer today is because Marcel invented the magnetic coating that allows your hard drive to store information. Without Marcel, we wouldn't have that. Well, what Marcel showed us in that conference was he had a camera called a Delaware camera, a camera that you attuned, just like you tune your radio. It wasn't just an aperture, you push the button, the aperture opens, and the light energy is registered on the photographic plate. But this Delaware camera was one where when you push the aperture, there was a tuning mechanism between the aperture and the photographic plate. So if the tuning mechanism were tuned to an energy that was in front of the camera, what would show up on the camera, the photographic plate, would be that an energy that it was attuned to. And he showed us that he could take a picture of the high energy waves that leave the mind when we think a thought. So if I hold something that I push down and I push down and I push down, at the same time I'm pushing it down, I'm pushing it out into the world energetically. I'm adding impetus to it, just like the spring. Every time it's pushed down, I put more potential energy into it. And that energy is a frequency that is determined by the source energy of whatever it is I'm shutting down. So if the thing I most want in the world is for someone to cherish and honor me, and I'm enraged because I'm being dissed, then I'm pushing down this energy because I refuse to come into relationship with the root of being dissed. I send that energy out into the world and it becomes a request, an energetic, resonating request for someone to come and diss me. And guess what's going to happen? Somebody's going to show up. Now, I have one of two choices when they show up. One, I'm going to live in the world of actuality and recognize that what's going on inside of me belongs to me, or I'm going to live in the realities of my mind, that is, that energy which this person who's come to diss me has resonated in me, the energy that I've dissociated from. I now, because they resonate that energy, build my perception, the picture that I paint on the inside of my eyeballs, out of that very energy. And so this person shows up in my mind with my problem attached, and I swear it must be their problem. But of course, I'm the one who's feeling it. So that's called projection. So I deny, I hide the information, I dissociate from it, now I project it. If I never learn how to collapse that projection, I'll never access that underlying energy. And ultimately, to heal, what I was shown in that event in the intensive was two things had to occur for healing to happen. One, love had to be conscious, active, and present. The state of active being had to be in me. And two, that which was hidden had to come to the surface, had to come out of hiding, had to come out of the unconscious. When you hear it said in the scriptures, you must forgive from your heart the wrongs of your brother, that isn't a bleeding heart statement that you're supposed to forgive your brother. It's saying that whatever your brother has resonated in you, that you put into your brain's image of him or her, and you painted that on the inside of your eyeballs, and you believe that you're actually looking out there, the energy of pain with which you painted that picture on the inside of your eyeballs, you have to learn to access. How do you do it? This brilliant man, Yeshua, 2,000 years ago said, here's it. That process is driven by your goals. So you cancel a goal, you collapse that projection. And now you're back into direct relationship with what you've hidden from yourself. What happens if love is present and that which is of trauma in you, again, whether it's from 20 generations ago and has been locked in your genes, all those generations, or whether it's from 20 years ago? or 20 minutes ago. If I can open directly, come back into direct relationship with what I've hidden from myself, and love is present, whatever is not true, whole, and wholesome about the energy in me, my quote-unquote energy that's off the mark or sin, dissolves. That's all. The simple bottom line of it. And so in one case, there's reality, the output of the mind, the pictures painted on the inside of our eyeballs. The whole Greek language points everybody to that. Become brilliant about what's painted on the inside of your eyeballs and pretending that it's outside of you. The Aramaic is always pointing to the actuality of the moment. So when active present love meets any form of trauma, trauma begins to dissolve. You know, it's kind of like the transmutation that takes place. You know, I have a drop of water laying here on the plate, and I take it out into the sun. Now, if I left that drop of water on the plate in a dark room, in 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 hours, it might evaporate. But if I take it out into the sun, very quickly the sun beating down on that plate will warm the water, and cause a transmutation. The form of the water will change from liquid H2O to a gas, and it will disappear. It will dissipate. Now, it won't dissipate if I paint a picture of the sun on the ceiling in the dark room. It won't dissipate if I open a book with a picture of the sun on it and put it in front of the droplet of water on the plate. It will only dissipate if the actual heat of the sun is radiating down on the plate. In exactly the same way, we have this pretense, we have this false notion, we have this false definition of love, that it's something about sexual athletics, or something about self-sacrifice, or all that stuff about sacrificing yourself to prove that you love. You know, gee, she says to him, would you die for me? Oh, I would die for you. The real question is, would you live for me? Would you function as a human being for me? And so one part of this practice that Yeshua's work in Aramaic is pointing toward is experiencing yourself and living truly as the presence of active love, living out of your created essence, rather than out of a false picture based on generational patterns of hostility and fear, which we all have in our generations. How many of us can say there was somebody in our bloodline that could have the conversation about healing and understood what healing meant and engaged in the process? I haven't met too many people in our world today that had ancestors that even had a clue that that was possible. And I include myself and my own ancestors. So entering into a practice. Yes, we're going to work with the manuscript. We're going to, quote unquote, study the manuscript. But ultimately, it's not about the study. Explaining the why to the mind, explaining how the mind works, explaining how this whole process works, allows the mind to shut up. Because the secrets are not hidden in the mind, they're hidden by the mind. When you hear Yeshua 2,000 years ago, they're saying, oh, tell us more. And he says, there are so many things I want to say to you, but you can't hear them. You don't have the brain cells for it, and you're not awake in being to hear it. So we want to bring correction to the mind. We're going to continuously point toward the actuality of the moment. And, you know, the mind's always saying, but tell me. Trying to tell the mind is like trying to put the cosmos in a walnut. Trying to take everything that the new Webb telescope is finding and fit it inside of a walnut. That's what trying to put the spiritual experience into the mind is like. So the mind ultimately must be laid aside for the experience to unfold. And everybody's trying to fix the walnut. We're not going to make an effort to do that. We're only going to bring correction to what's in the walnut that covers over the experience and tries to pretend that it is or that it has the experience. It doesn't. Your mind doesn't have the experience. Your mind can't understand the experience. Your mind can't grasp the experience. It's not the source of the experience. It's the block against the experience. That's what led Paul, I believe, to say, be transformed by the renewal of your mind. The mind is looking for the correction, but if one has not yet quit their membership in the one world universal religion of blame, then the correction is always about somebody else. But when you, who was it that said, get your bloated nothingness out of the way? Yeshua said, in order for you to live, you've got to die. The false self has to go, has to be removed. When the false self, the ego self, the self that is a product of the errors made, a self that's capable of hostility and fear, of vengeance and rage, that self is the self that needs to be healed. And once you learn to collapse the projections of the mind, then you come to realize, rather than your mind pretending to be the experience, that you are the experience. When you get it out of the way, you experience the fact that you are the correction. You are the presence of love that brings that correction. And so that's everything that the Khabouris manuscript, that the teachings of Yeshua is pointing toward. And the entire manuscript was written in the Aramaic language, which was the tongue of Yeshua. It was written in a script called a Stranglia. And it was specifically developed by a school called the School of Edessa to record these teachings. And this school developed the vowel points that enhance the understanding of the Aramaic language, of the pronunciation of the language is a language that consists of very few words, and so emphasis on words, the way that words were spoken, and ultimately they used markings. You'll remember there's a point where it says nobody would even change one jot or tittle of the scriptures. Well, it would be nice if that were true, and the jot or tittle are those smallest characters in the Aramaic. Let me just turn to a file that I opened this morning. Let me get my hand on this. And I had looked for this the other day, but had difficulty finding it, and I did find it this morning when I was doing some research. So there's a translation. You can go and get yourself a copy of it and look it up, called the Net Bible. And this is one specifically you can go look at in writing, while the people who are playing with it, the kind of, evangelical teaching says that not one jot or tittle will be changed. It is the literal inerrant word. But let's listen to the introduction to the second edition of the Net Bible. And what they do is they provide a list of the changes that were made in this new edition. And then, quote, here's what they say. Important key passages were revised to make the translation more consistent and acceptable with the mainstream of evangelical views, and thus more acceptable to the, check it out, it's in writing, The acknowledgement, oh, well, this didn't conform to our beliefs, so we changed the text to conform with our beliefs. And what that means is you had a mind that was structuring realities, constructs, and it wanted a teaching that conformed with its constructs. Instead of being called out to say, oh, there's something in error in your mind that needs correction, it's like, no, we'll change the text so it reflects our beliefs. The objective of this work from the Aramaic is to fully, completely, totally, 1,000% honor truth, and wherever it leads, whatever it brings, to own that what's moving in my physiology belongs to me, and if there's disturbance that needs correction, I need to do the work of correction rather than change the text that I say is directing my life. And of course, this is just one admission in this net Bible. On and on and on goes the list. So in order to preserve the accuracy of the writings from the Aramaic, this particular school developed these markings that corrected or conveyed the pronunciation of the vowels in each word. So these vowel points were added for clarity of pronunciation and meaning. And then, of course, we move from Greek. It's taken from Aramaic. There are those who will say, no, the Peshitta text was translated from the Greek. No, it was not. All you have to do is look at meanings to verify that for yourself. But it went from Greek to Latin, Middle English, and then Modern English. And as that happened, the nuances of the Aramaic just kind of disappeared. And there are many concepts in the Aramaic that we will be working with and unfolding that it literally takes a whole paragraph to attempt to put it into the English language. Because language, the common belief is that language conveys meaning. Language only conveys a specific set of brain cells that are firing in the individual using the language. So if I have a set of brain cells firing, I'll use certain words that I believe reflect that which is firing in my brain cell structure. But if you have different brain cells in you, firing in you, then you cannot hear what I'm saying. Your listening comes from your brain. Just like pain, distress, symptoms come from the brain, not from the body, listening comes from the body. Realities are products of what's firing in the mind. So we're going to work to develop the brain cells so that we can more accurately understand what was firing in the brain cells of the man who delivered these words, and in his native language, what did these words mean? And as you develop that, all of a sudden, those concepts become totally, completely clear. And for me, what I've found over the decades of working with the Aramaic, and it takes time. It's not something somebody's going to, oh, I'll have that all in hand by tomorrow. Then the teachings that Yeshua put forward in the Aramaic become simply applicable in your life and sensible, logical, where you live. It's not about Sunday morning. It's not about church. It's not about churchianity. It applies at every instant of your life, and in engaging it, it supplies you with the ability to function wholly, fully as the correction, fully as the presence of love in your own mind. And when your mind is serving up, is distracting with something that is less than love, then what is conveyed from the Aramaic is that you have work to do in order to clean up your own mind, in order to open the space that you can arrive in your own mind as the correction for what perhaps has been going on for in your bloodline for generations and generations. And in particular, we're going to change totally and completely the meaning of the word love and forgiveness. Forgiveness, I've been working with that one for 43, 44 years. I've had several people over the years who said, well, why don't you just create another word for it, Michael, instead of trying to correct that one? Because when you're working with brain cells and you're working with the mind's foundation, if you don't correct the associations that mind have with the word, it will never be able to hear anything that leads to any sort of relationship with truth. So forgiveness, we now know, does not mean I'm going to let you off the hook for the pain that's moving inside of me, as the Greeks would say. Well, they hurt you, but you just forgive them. You be big about it. Never forgive anybody ever again. And you never will do that once you understand forgiveness from the Aramaic. You'll give up the whole idea that any form of forgiveness is needed in the sense of you being let off the hook or them being let off the hook, that God's going to forgive you. It's never going to happen because that's got nothing to do with forgiveness. It's been totally and completely turned backward. So in the Aramaic, when Yeshua speaks about forgiveness, he's talking about collapsing the constructs of your own mind, the pictures painted on the inside of your eyeballs, accessing the underlying dissociated trauma and processing through that trauma so that correction is given to the mind, that your presence as love brings correction to the mind. Or if you can't do that, that you've got someone that you can support you, that you can rely on, that can help you to process through those things that need correction. But an even more difficult word, and in the early days it was difficult to get people to understand what I was talking about with the change in the going back to the correct meaning or the Aramaic meaning of forgiveness. But it's even more difficult with love. And that's what the Aramaic points to, is the coming to the actual experience of yourself as being the actuality of the presence of love. And there's such confusion in the way that the world uses this word love. I love you. You should love me. I only want to be loved. Oh, please love me. That's all falsity. And once you bring correction to your mind, what you're asking your mind to do is to support you experiencing yourself as the being that you are, rather than experiencing yourself as a product of what's happened to you in the past, what's gone on in your generational bloodline, and the power person messages that have come to you. So we're looking to bring clarity to those things, 100 other things as well, but they're two of the core ones. So we're going to enter into, if you're with me in the text, we're on page 4, the last paragraph on page 4, and the idea is to enter into a similar thing that in the Jewish tradition was called midrash, which meant people would come together and I would change the word here from study, but interact with the scriptures, and in so doing, refine one's ability to bring correction to their own minds, rather than entering into a study that says, I want to put into my intellect the correct information. You don't want to put, well, it won't hurt to put the correct information into your mind, but what you really want to arrive at is a correct interpretation, a correct understanding, and a correct experience of yourself, free from the mind. Oftentimes over the years, if you've ever been in one of the classes that I've done where I've been presenting to a group that works for the Course in Miracles, you'll remember that I'll get up in the front of the room, and I've usually got a 4x8 whiteboard, and I'll write on the whiteboard, don't study A Course in Miracles. And here I'm presenting, I'm in Bellingham, Washington. I'm presenting to a group that's been for 10 years been studying A Course in Miracles. And I show up and say, don't study A Course in Miracles. They're like, what do you mean? That's what we're here for. Isn't that what you're here to do, is to print and study? No. Learn forgiveness. Course isn't about getting a proper set of concepts to put in your mind so that now you can be the experience of who you are. You need not seek for love. You need only seek, find, and forgive all of the barriers within yourself that prevent you from experiencing yourself as the correction. That weaken every power person message that you were ever given, that you're deficient, that you're broken, that there's something wrong with you, or there's something outside of you that causes pain. And so this next thought, in Western culture for many centuries, access to the Bible was limited to the clergy. And if the clergy were about doing their work, not about studying the book, if they'd gone to a seminary where they were about doing their work, then they came back more capable of facilitating people, experiencing themselves as love, and using words for the only thing words can be used for, and that is to point out the error of the mind and open space for the presence of love, for the actual. And this is an important part of the practice, that you actually spend time cultivating yourself, your relationship with yourself as the presence of love, and being able to bring that light forward. Not a picture of the light painted in your mind, like, the picture of the sun pointing down on the plate with the water droplets on it. The actual presence of the sun is needed. The presence of the heat is needed. The presence of the transmuting energy of the sun is needed in order for that water droplet to accelerate its evaporation. The presence of your human beingness, your light, your presence of love is what creates a transmutation of anything and everything in you, correction. And so that's the direction we're heading in. That's what we want to do with this. We're calling it a study, but really it's not a study. It's moving into the practice of the work of Yeshua. You'll remember that particular passage where there's a group of disciples that say, what do we need to do? What do we need to do in order to please the Creator? And he tells them, gives them a parable. And half of his audience say, too hard a saying, and they leave. This manuscript is about, and what we're entering into, the approach we've taken to it over the last 5 decades has been to wring from it the understanding of the how-to and to engage in the tools. So we're at the top of page 5 if you're with me in the manuscript. And the manuscript mentions Dr. Yonan and Dr. Dan MacDougald. Dan laid a foundation for this work using the rules of evidence as an attorney to determine the veracity of information. In the Western world, in the legal field, there's a method that was used for determining whether information was accurate or not that came into the courtroom. They called them the rules of evidence. We're hearing great abuse in the public world about the rules of evidence. Oh, the judge wouldn't let me say this. Well, yeah, the judge wasn't interested in creating a platform for you to spew your puke on everybody. The judge was interested in having information given about the matter at hand. And so Dan utilized that methodology, the rules of evidence, for determining what got into this translation work. And the whole objective was to come to an understanding of the first century meanings of Yeshua's Aramaic words. And, this particular idea is that with which he was able to drive out demons. And in Aramaic, demon would be, a translation would be the mental aberrations, the denial, the dissociation, the projections of the mind. They originally worked with a text called the Yonan Codex, and it was incomplete, so they found, Dan funded and took an expedition to the Middle East and found this particular Khabouris that we're working with. It's named the Khabouris because it was found on the river Khabur in northern Iraq. And that area was basically the foundation point of the uncovering of the Aramaic language today. So the objective was not to translate words. If you've seen that movie Lost in Translation, our whole workshop, communication, did you hear what I think I said, is founded on this principle. If I use words to represent certain brain cells in me that don't match what's moving in you, then I have not communicated. And most people rarely use words for communication. Most people use words to get what they want. To use words for communication is, in my attempt to transfer, I have a reality in my mind. I have a structure in my mind, a construct, an understanding from my work over the years with these tools. And what I'm looking to do, to the best of my ability, is to get that construct intact into your mind so that the same tools are available to you as we've developed with this work. So we didn't look to translate words, we looked to decipher their first century meanings. It gives a whole new life to the teachings of Yeshua. One of the key concepts, and we brought this one up before, but this one is a good one to be reminded of often. When they said, what's most important, he didn't say love your neighbor. Total misuse of the word love. But rather, have this condition in your mind called Rachma open. And once you realize that, then a whole different experience can come, because you understand that there is a gateway in your mind. There's no such idea in the English language, but in the Aramaic, what Yeshua was saying was, if you want, in response to that question, it's like, what's most important in the law? What comes first? Law, again, is another word that's been distorted. Law isn't the rule of a superior in Aramaic. Law is just the way it works. So what people are asking is, in order for me to function fully as a human being, as the active presence of love, what do I have to do? What does it take? And what he said in Aramaic is, again, this is our best use of words to try to represent what a single word in Aramaic meant, is there's a gateway in the frontal lobes of your brain, and when it's open, your created essence, love, will be present in your physiology, and that's the transforming power. That's the sunshine that you are, that will transform everything in you that needs correction. But you've got to show up in your own mind. You can't allow your mind to structure realities based in its unresolved hostility and fear and blame everybody else for it. And you'll see that the course that Dan created, Emotional Maturity Instruction, is referenced here. Dan created that out of the early Aramaic work, and when I met Dan, and we found that we'd been traveling similar, Dan had created Emotional Maturity Instruction, and he was a lawyer. I had created and been teaching under the title of Lessons in Living. I actually had started a school program in Delray Beach, Florida, at the Unity School there. It still goes on today. At least the last time we were down there, I don't know, it's maybe 5 or 6 years ago, the course was still being taught, and I started that when my kids were small. You know, my son was probably 5, so that's 4 or 5. He's now 44, so it's 40 years ago. So I was doing lessons in living. And so when Dan and I met and found we've been traveling similar paths, his from a legal perspective, mine from a naturopathic medical perspective, we put it together, we brought nutrition into it, and we ended up with laws of living. In order to live as a human being, what does it take on every level? And, you know, ultimately you have to be holy. You know, of course, we've got a meaning from the Greeks about holy. You're supposed to be down on your knees with your hands folded, right? Then you're holy. Well, I'll tell you what, some of the most abusive, vicious minds I've ever seen sat around with their hands folded and pretended to be holy. It's not what it means. It means that you are in harmony with the way this energy system called life works on every level, in your thoughts, in your words, in your intentions, in your perceptions. Having Rachma active, a filter in the frontal lobes of the brain that keeps the mind on track with love and brings love into your human form. Having Kuba active, a second Aramaic word, kind of corresponds with Rachma, but it's a filter over the back part of the brain, the perceptual part of the brain, that keeps your perceptions on track with love. And from that, when that's aligned, your words are in alignment with love. The energetic dynamics move within yourself, and there's no need to go run off and drug yourself with some sort of junk food sold by the culture, addicted by the fast food industry that puts together different combinations of salt and fat and sugar and calls it food, but rather you know what food actually is and you're attracted to, and you eat actual food, that which brings the energetic elements in that your structure needs to function fully, wholly. Nothing to do with being down on hands and knees. Nothing to do with piety. So Dan and I put together emotional maturity instruction with my lessons in living and came up with laws of living. And if there's a sufficient interest, we usually teach it each year at Heartland. And since COVID struck, we haven't been doing Heartland, so that's kind of it's now been since 2019, so almost 5 years. However, there has been some call from several people to perhaps do an online Laws of Living course. So if you're interested in that, let us know. And if there's enough interest, we'll put it forward. We had put forward, there was some conversation about people who were interested in doing an intuitive development, but the interest has to be there for us to move forward with it. So if you're interested in that, let us know. So the text here on bottom page 5 goes on to explain how Dan had left the manuscript with the Western Rite Syrian Orthodox Church, and the objective was to preserve the work that he'd done and bring it forward. And when the Archbishop and one of the bishops of the church were given the manuscript, since I'd worked with Dan for so long, they approached me. And it was interesting that when they approached me, they shared that the Western Rite Syrian Orthodox Church had been started in America to bring this understanding that was available through the Aramaic language. The bishop of that church, Donald Jolly Gabriel, was a native Aramaic speaker. His family system was native Aramaic. However, they had difficulty. They'd been in America for several decades, and with the work that Dan and I had done, when the bishop and the archbishop came to intensives at Heartland, and they're like, this is what we were sent here to do 50 years ago, and you're doing it. And so we began to work together, and that is what ended up putting me into a deeper relationship with the Khabouris and with this work called Enlightenment. And there's a note here, and you might, if you want to look at a little deeper at some perspectives on this, I had actually started a book, and it's kind of been on hold for a couple of decades now, called The End of Suffering, Resurrecting the Original Aramaic Yeshua. We have, there's a minister at Unity in Sarasota, Don Jackson, bless his heart. He's left his body now. But he was very engaged in studying with me, and I spoke there at Unity often. And I was working on this book, and so he and I did a workshop on a particular Sunday afternoon about, geez, I don't even know, 20 years ago now, 15 years ago, whatever it was. And we did a reading of those first two chapters, and the book is a conversation between, much like Why Is This Happening to Me Again?, where Why Is This Happening to Me Again is a conversation between myself and a character in the book. The End of Suffering is a conversation between Yeshua and a character. And this character is asking Yeshua to clarify the meaning. So if you go to whyagain.org, and I'm sure Jeannie, since I've mentioned this, is probably already putting it in the notes. There's a link there you can listen to. Dawn and I, we did a Sunday afternoon workshop where he played the character and I read Yeshua's part, and we put forward that those first two chapters. And so if you want to give a listen to that, you might find that useful in the work that we're doing here. And again, the objective here is to do the work of this manuscript, not to study or get an intellectual picture of the manuscript. And so we're now at, let's see, about 8 minutes. So what do you say if we've aroused any questions that we just check and see, Miss Jeannie? Do we have anything happening in the phone queue or anything happening in the chat room with questions about where we're going with this?
It is all quiet. Have several people even on Podbean listening. And
awesome. Welcome everybody on Podbean. We're moving in the direction of learning to do more and more with Podbean, so hopefully that's going to become more functional for you, and we'll be able to, we're looking, in fact, if there's anybody out there that has the technical knowledge, right now we're doing this show through Blog Talk, and Jeannie's actually got a microphone and recording it through Podbean so you can listen there, and it becomes more globally available. If anybody's got the technical know-how, it would be wonderful to figure out a way where we can bring these two streams in together so we can record and converse in both mediums at the same time. So that, because one of the benefits of Podbean, you know, on Blog Talk, you have to have a U.S. phone number, or you have to pay for calling into the show on Blog Talk. But with Podbean, from within Podbean, if you've got that on your phone, you don't have to make a phone call, you don't use cell minutes, you just click and we can have a conversation on Podbean. But we don't have those two streams connected yet. If anybody's got any technical know-how and would be willing to assist us with that, that would be awesome. So if you're out there in listener land, we've just got a few minutes. Hopefully this conversation has stirred some things for you. And or if you've got anything going on in your world, you know, our objective here, yes, we're going to be covering this whole manuscript, and it will go hand in hand with the conversation about doing one's work. So if questions come up about any of the tools, about the worksheets or any part of it, if anybody's doing the codependence to interdependence communication practicum, we're here to support you with questions. And so if you have any difficulty, any challenges, any support needed with any aspect of your work regarding these tools, that's what we're here to do. And so if you're out there in listener land and you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, our call-in number is 563-999-3581. And so if you're out there and you're on one of those stations where we can't see you, okay, if you call that number, you'll be listening to the show directly, 563-999-3581. And then if you push 1, it raises a hand, just like Jeannie just said, and we'll get to talk to you. So let's say hello.
all right. It's Dusty 904. You're on the air.
Welcome.
Well, hello, hello. Well,
Aloha.
I'm doing better and better. Thank you muchly. How about you?
Sweet. I'm rocking, doing well. I had an awesome weekend. I went and studied with a a man who's a master at working with the body end of things, and it was just a really sweet weekend.
Oh, good. I remember you told me you were going to do that. I'm glad that turned out so well.
It was awesome.
I know we're running out of time real quick here, so I wanted to say, you mentioned earlier about demons, and I want to ask you what Aramaic for that means. But before, I want to say that I had this is in the Tibetan way of thinking at one time. Somebody carved, a little monk carved a little skull out of a kukui nut I had around my neck as a necklace, and the skull had a big smile. I mean, it was you should have been scary, but instead it had this big smile, and the phraseology was compassion, even for the demon.
Right.
And so on that, with what time's left, what do they say about that in Aramaic, the demonic thing?
Well, my understanding would be that, the ancient minds, they thought that, when the lightning storm came and they were damaged, they must have sinned and offended a god, and that God was getting even with them for what they'd done. And so there's a whole fear-based game that goes on, and hallucinations about these creatures that are out to get us in the creation and all the evil things, when in Aramaic the word evil has two meanings. One word is unripened, it's incomplete, which, as we've talked about before, has to do with goals. And the other meaning relates to sin. If I fired at the target on the archery range and I missed the bullseye, the scorekeeper would yell sin. If I missed the target altogether, the scorekeeper would yell out evil. So it's like totally and completely off target. And what we create when we're off target is an absence of the presence that we're designed to be, that we come to identify with something that's just totally out of alignment with who we are. So it's not about, and those who are, my take is those who are card-carrying members of the committed, devout, one-world religion of blame have got to have something or somebody. If they can't see it, well, they'll make up a god that, created the lightning strike that burned the barn because they sinned. They've got a demon. They've got some sort of critter that's out there that's going to get them. Where in Aramaic, it had to do with states of mind. It was talking about what we were dealing with within ourselves. It wasn't about some evil creature out there. And there are societies that have created personifications of those things, and the real meaning behind them, at least, again, my best understanding, is when I'm willing to bring that energy that I've dissociated from in myself to the presence of love, it dissolves, correction occurs, and the so-called demon disappears. It's called forgiveness. My take is the only reason that our world has poverty, disease, suffering, death, divorce, murder, war, is people do not understand how to remove the demons, the unresolved, pained energies within themselves from their generations, and therefore create out of deficiency, create out of fear. Probably the greatest atrocity done to us as human beings, and that we've bought into, is that we've had hidden from us the fact that we are by nature creators. We're setting the game up. The essence of my book, Why Is This Happening to Me Again? People through their whole lifetime are like, well, gee, I'm back to this same pattern. Why is this again? Why? Because you're a creator. It's not what's going on out there. It's what you're creating. And the objective of forgiveness is to access the underlying dynamic of the creations that you say, I don't want to do this anymore. Bring them to the presence of love so they are transmuted, dissolved, and disappeared. Does that make sense? Did we lose you, Dusty?
You what's that?
Oh, I couldn't hear your voice.
Okay. Let me see. I think I'm on speakerphone. Okay. Well, we're past that. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. Well, thanks a lot, and I appreciate that because every culture's got that, I guess. I mean, in fact, I believe
Every culture's
just
got
about
their
all of
protections.
us are walking around with that crawling all over us, and nobody wants to look or feel or deal with it. Some people do, and the ones that do they're the brave ones. They're the warriors.
Well, I think also that once we have an idea, it can be done. You know, I think one of the things that happens is people try and try and try and try without a foundation, without a basis without real knowledge. They try, and everything they've tried, nothing they've tried has worked, and so they go, of course, this can never be done. And the truth is, it can all be done. It just takes having the ability to bring the presence of love forward, you know, to be the sun that we were designed to be, and the trauma world dissolves and dissipates and disappears individually and collectively.
Yeah, that's really sad when someone tries but they don't have the tools or the reference to facilitate that effort. I'm glad you have this program so it helps facilitate.
Yeah, and it definitely gives us the opportunity to forgive that sadness.
Yeah, there you go. And
all right, my friend, appreciate you.
Okay, you too.
It just yelled in my ear that we're complete, so it's going to cut us off. All right, you have a blessed one. Lots of love. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Create the best year yet of your eternal life. It's an awesome gift to give the world. Blessings. Bye-bye.